Yeah, fun. How was that? That project, how was it? Why is this on? It was hidden in there, wasn't it? I hid most of it away from you in that spreadsheet. Good. Those of you, who's had Math 245? Corbin has, and I thought one other person has had Math 245 in here. Maybe I'm wrong. Oh, we have 2 people. Yes, so you saw some little Math 245 creeping in that project. Very nice. Math 245, it's what is finite math? Finite mathematics. It is, did anybody read the entirely optional section after the end of the project? I put like a part 3, part 4. If you read that and you enjoyed it, you'll love Math 245. I think I'm safe in saying that, Corbin. I think I'm safe in saying that. If you read that section and it didn't turn you off immediately, and you were like, dude, this is actually kind of cool. Math 245 is right up your alley. It's give you the backstory of 245. There didn't used to be a 245 before this year. Years ago, before you guys even got here, Math 243 had everything that we have in it now, plus linear programming, which is a big part of Math 245, plus a lot more combinations and permutation stuff, all crammed into 10 weeks. So I found this out, and I'm like, our students aren't refrigerators that we shove groceries into. They process information, they don't just store it. So I said, and then I started going around to other schools in the state. Other schools in the state, nobody was doing linear programming. And some of them were doing the combinations and permutations to some degree, but the linear programming was out. And I asked, why is this happening? And as it turns out, there was some kind of a backroom deal made with OSU that 243 would count as 245. And I'm like, you're ripping these students off. I mean, it might feel like you're getting ripped off by another class. That might feel like you're getting ripped off too. But at the same time, you're not learning anything well. You're just rushing through ideas and not learning anything. In my opinion, it's learning. I mean, I think it's a class to do it, but you should spend more time on fewer topics. That way you can actually, 10 weeks is too short anyway, in my opinion, this Italian's opinion. So anyway, 245 is this very strange little course that only a few people need, but it's chock full of that kind of mathematics that is just totally rad. Totally rad. Some of you don't think it's rad at all. That's totally fine. The reason you did, how many of you felt like the last part of the project was too easy? Yes. Yes, yes. How can pressing F9 and averaging results be mathematics? Rachel, go. Did you press F9 10 times? Did you write down 10 numbers? Did you average those 10 numbers? 12 points to you. Or whatever it was, 10 points, 12 points. The idea, and this is where I run the risk, and it's a probability problem for me. How long to make the projects to not turn you off from reading them, but to make them clear enough to motivate. The whole point of the part before the last page was to show you that it's doing the same convoluted mathematics that 245 does, but it's getting you the result with a simulation versus a pure mathematical formula. So it should feel easier. This is why we said flight simulators use this technology, for that reason. You don't have somebody in there punching formulas into a computer for a flight simulator. They're dumping random numbers into situations and out come the results. You guys are simulating the impossible task of figuring out what the probability is of drawing a flush if you're sitting 2 right of the dealer in Texas Hold'em after the river, or whatever the hell that, I made up that problem. I said, how can I make this sound as ridiculous as possible? Let's watch a game of poker on TV. Oh, that guy right there, I'm gonna model that guy right there, right now. You cannot do that, even with Math 245. But you can totally do it with random numbers, and isn't that badass? Isn't that badass? You guys witnessed a really cool random number miss in the weather the past couple days. Ah, it's gonna break by noon. Yeah. It's gonna burn off by noon. They don't miss that badly often. So you can appreciate how likely the non-outliers are, right? There was an outlier on, I think it was Tuesday, because it was like foggy and crappy in the morning. Oh, burn off by noon. It's Thursday. Still here. It's raining now. So, I mean, every once in a while you get it wrong, but every once in a while the F9 won't give you a result you want. But the other 8 million times, it will. Did you guys compare your notes on the back problems with somebody else in the class? You weren't getting the exact same numbers, were you? But you were getting close. That's the point. Close, I like close enough. Close enough. How do you measure close enough? Take Math 244. Take Math, if you care enough to take Math 244. That's okay. Some of you don't have to do it, you don't want to do it, you'll be done 2 weeks out. That's fine. But Math 244 talks about close enough. When is close enough? So if it's okay with you guys, defer that discussion until Math 244. I want to hint at it today a little bit, only because it's important enough to talk about. But as far as the formal discussion of how close is close enough, We'll talk about that too. That's what 244 is all about, essentially, is how close is close enough. Cool? So once you got past the fact that it was too easy, but I wanted you to do something that was too easy. Okay? Okay, decent. Okay. I like that one a lot. I actually stumped the CIS guys with some of those. Did you look at the functions in the spreadsheets at all? Yeah, I was stumping the CIS guys. I was pretty proud of myself. The one with the iPod randomizer, none of them could figure that out. I was like, yeah, check this out. It's the mode command. The problem was they weren't thinking big picture enough. They were trying to make this really long command to find the matches. I'm like, instead of finding the matches, just don't find the non-matches. And they're like, what is that? That sounds like Dr. Seuss. Actually, it sounds like Math 243. What's the chance of at least one? I don't know. Go for the chance of none and take it from one. Right? It's just the same trick I taught you guys 5 weeks ago. It works well. If you're to excel in computer simulations, CIS 125E is a freaking awesome. You've taken it, Richie. It's an awesome course. CIS. Anybody besides Richie, CIS 125E or a VBA class, which they might not even teach anymore. I'm not sure. Great computer-driven, Excel-driven courses. Excel's got limitations, but man, the stuff it can do is pretty ridiculous too. So yeah, there's your third project. Your last project, one more. It's on false positives and false negatives, which is something that we go into great depth in 244, but it's also a gorgeous use of the probabilities we've been playing with all along. And it does. The reason it's a project and not done in class is I've learned not to do that. It's different enough that it makes students worry if I do it in class. It needs to be done. It's in the curriculum. But if I make it in class, it's different enough that it freaks people out. They start asking themselves, is it binomial? Is it normal? Is it Bayes? And I'm like, you know what? Let's just take Bayes and put it in a project and make it on its own. You know? And the reason I love it is because it allows you to answer questions like you go to the doctor and you're taking a test for some disease that you think you might have genetic ties to, and it comes back positive. Do you start taking drugs because you tested positive for that disease? That's one answer, is to start taking drugs. I mean, I remember I tested positive for hypothyroidism 2 years ago. Hypothyroidism. If anybody knows what hypothyroidism is, you know I am a textbook case of what it's not. Just if you know what hypothyroidism is. And the doctor's like, well, you know, we can get you on these thyroid meds, and I'm like, or we can maybe just take the test again in 6 months and see what comes up. And that could have been a false positive. It could have said I had hypothyroidism, and I don't. Tests can be wrong. Every test has a false positive rate. We'll learn about them in this project. They also have a false negative rate. You don't hear about those very often. False negatives, generally, nothing bad happens from a false negative, at least in the way they're discussed. Very often, false positives, when have you heard about that, like in your lives, a false positive?
Medical.
Medical, good. I heard it other places too. DUI checkpoints. Oh, I blew false positive. Well, that's quite possible. Quite possible. The fact that you're yelling at me and vomiting in my shoes maybe proves otherwise. But you can blow a false positive for a DWI. And one of the answers is test them again. But the trick with that is you have a window. Beyond, your liver starts filtering things and whatnot. So false positives cause, or not even just checkpoints, but also drug testing for work. Mandatory drug testing for work. I had a friend back on the East Coast. Would you mind pissing for me for my piss test? I'm like, yes, I would. Because you're going to test positive for hypothyroidism. But the idea is that you can lose your job on a false positive for that, right? But a false negative for that, you see, nobody's going to complain. You know what? I actually was completely high as a kite that day, and the test came back negative. Nobody's going to say that, right? So false positives, you tend to hear about them in situations like that, and I think it's the kind of thing you guys should know how to deal with mathematically. To analyze the question. I know I'm clean. I need to metric this so I can take it to court and prove. I've had to use it in court cases. I've been asked to be an expert witness in the trials from here and there, and I've had to use the very mathematics you're going to do in that project in court for expert testimony. The one I'm the most proud of, though, is I think it's example 3 in the project, which is when I talked my neighbor down after her amniocentesis exam for Down syndrome. That's my proudest math moment, I think, to date, other than what we're going to do later on today. But in the project, I think it's example 3, I forget, example 3 or 4, it's about an amnio draw, tested positive for Down syndrome. False positive, turned out to be a false positive. You never know with certainty if it is or not. You can just measure the likelihood of it being, and you'll see the math. First time, I can remember that math calms somebody down. First time I remember ever that math calms somebody down instead of jacking them up. So, yeah. So anyway, I think it's the most important project you guys have, personally speaking. This is probably the most utilitarian project. Now, part of the fun of that would have been having you guys set up your own simulators. That would have been frickin' rad. That would also require like 6 weeks. So let's teach you guys all the commands and practice all the commands. And I would love to do that. Some of you are like, yeah, you have them, take them, explore them. Take the spreadsheets, download them, save them, rip them apart, figure out what's going on. Highly. That's how I learned Excel. I never learned Excel by a course. I learned it by, I'm a punk rocker. I learned it by looking at things on Google. You do the same. If you ever have Excel questions, ask me. I love to work through stuff with Excel stuff with students. Okay, so last project, false positives, false negatives. 3 quizzes next week. Up to 3. I mean, again, do as many as you want. They're all optional. 1 is, you're at 7? Well, there's 3 more. There's your 10. Done. So 1 is on the Gambler's Ruin. I've mentioned that a couple times with you guys. The Gambler's Ruin, it's a great way of winning $1 in Vegas. The problem is, describing the problem to you, it sounds like a foolproof way of winning $1. You know, I've told you guys the foolproof way of winning $1 in a bar, right? Go into a bar and bet someone they can't eat 6 saltine crackers under a minute. You almost guarantee you're going to win $1 on that one. I've done it once. I've tried it multiple times. It's pretty common. When they start laughing around second 40, awesome. But there's a foolproof mathematical way of winning $1 in Vegas, and it's in that quiz. Your job is to analyze how much it costs to win that $1. That's the trick. You've heard the phrase "lost his kingdom for the want of a nail." You may have heard that phrase. It's an old phrase. Lost his kingdom for the want of a nail. Robbing Peter to pay Paul. You heard that phrase maybe? Okay, never. There's another variant of it that involves monetary amounts. I can't remember what it is. But the point of the quiz is to analyze how much money it would take on average to win back $1 at a craps table in Vegas. So if you basically had a pocket full of money and went in and played, on average, how much would it cost to win back $1? So if you played craps over and over and over again, and you wanted to average that $1 back, and it costs $1 to play, how much would you spend on average to win? Craps is the fairest game of chance in Vegas. The fairest, not skill. Also, you talked about this last time, right? Blackjack, I think, or somebody mentioned blackjack. Blackjack's somewhat of a game of skill. Poker is a game of skill. You got to know when to stop and when to start. And when to... Pure chance, roulette wheel, one-arm bandits. Craps, just roll a dice. Chuck-a-luck, we analyze that one, kind of old school. Craps is the fairest, for the player, it's the fairest game. That doesn't mean it's fair, it's just the least unfair. It's a 49.44% chance of winning on a pass line bet. That's almost 50%, but not quite, and that's the point. Roulette wheels look like they're 50%. I'm gonna bet on red. You look at the wheel, it's like it's half red, except for the 2 green spaces. Except for the 2 green spaces, and that's where they get you, right? Of course that's where they get you. Except for the English. The English only have 1 green space on their wheel. Yes, it's probably 1. Better odds for the player. Still not 50-50, still right below 50-50. But they're better. But craps is the best, and you'll use craps to analyze the gambler's rules.
It's fun, too.
Say that again?
It's fun, too.
Oh, I'm not saying these games aren't fun. I'm saying don't go in there expecting to make more money than you walked in with. People always say, why are you telling us not to gamble? I'm not telling you not to gamble. I'm giving you the tools necessary to know how long you can gamble until you have to leave because you ran out of money. That's what I'm trying to teach you. How long can you play until you're done? Or if you want to play for X number of time, how much money should you walk in with? That's kind of the tools, and that, not to mention life insurance and things like that. You guys know, obviously. So it's all tied back to gambling. It's all tied back to dice. And chickens, for that matter. Chickens, yes. Now, I'm getting tired of the chickens. We'll move off the chickens today, I promise. The other 2 quizzes next week are on the binomial distribution. I know we have not even defined what that is yet we were doing it yesterday. So I want to start with the definition. We got a little bit cart ahead of the horsey on Tuesday. That's my fault, completely my fault, because you guys were asking such awesome questions and I took us off on these beautiful tangents that led us right away from defining what the hell we were talking about. So, you now know what a binomial distribution is, except you don't know what a binomial distribution is. So, let's start with that. And this is one of those few times I'll actually break down the definitions. I don't like doing this for the most part because